Before she can move, one of the officers shoves her into the chair. The cold metal bites into her back, the clippers hum closer, and she feels the vibration against her scalp. A thick coil of her silver hair hits the floor, then another. Each strand feels like a piece of her being ripped away, her identity, her history, her pride. The room's silent except for the clipper's drone and the soft thud of her hair falling. One of the guards laughs, cruel and mocking. "She looks better already," he says, smirking. Riker wipes a few stray hairs off his sleeve. "Should have come in here with some respect," he sneers. "Now you look more presentable." Celeste's fists clench, her knuckles white against the chair's arms. Her body trembles with rage, but when she speaks, her voice is ice cold. "You'll regret this." Riker leans in, his face twisted with contempt. "People like you always say that." Then, just like that, it's over. Riker opens the door and gestures toward the hallway with fake politeness. "You're free to go. Courtroom's that way." Celeste stands slowly, her hands shaking just a bit. She grabs her badge from his desk without a word and walks out, her steps measured, her face unreadable. But inside she's burning, not with shame, but with purpose. What Riker doesn't know is that Celeste isn't here as a defendant or a spectator. She's not here to be judged. She's the judge, and she's about to take her seat on the bench. Today, we're diving into a story that's going to hit you hard, a real-life drama about power, injustice, and one woman who flipped the script in the most epic way. Picture this. It's early morning in Charleston, South Carolina. The sun's just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows through the Spanish moss hanging from the trees. The air's quiet, almost serene, as Celeste Monroe, a poised and confident black woman, steps out of her silver Buick and heads up the grand stone steps of the Charleston Federal Courthouse. Her heels click against the concrete, each step steady, purposeful. She's gripping a slim leather portfolio, her navy blue blazer crisp, her posture sharp. This is a woman who knows who she is. Celeste has always been about keeping it low-key outside the courtroom. No judicial robe, no flashy display of her title. She walks in like a regular citizen, blending in. That's her thing. It's almost like a ritual, a way to stay grounded. But today? Today's about to go sideways in a way she never saw coming. As she approaches the security checkpoint, the vibe shifts. Deputy Hank Riker, a bailiff with a reputation for being old-school and hard-nosed, is posted up by the metal detectors. He's got that look, narrowed eyes, stiff posture, like he's ready to throw his weight around. Celeste is about to walk through when he clocks her. His gaze sweeps over her, her silver hair twisted neatly, her pressed slacks, the quiet confidence in her eyes. Something about her rubs him the wrong way. In his mind, she doesn't belong here, not strutting into a federal courthouse like she owns it. "Ma'am," Riker says, his voice gruff, holding up a gloved hand, "step out of line." Celeste pauses, meeting his eyes. Her voice is calm, even. "Is there a problem, officer?" Riker doesn't answer right away. He's sizing her up like he's trying to figure out how much he can push her. He doesn't know who she is, and honestly, he doesn't seem to care. To him, she's just another black woman who needs to be put in her place. "No ID displayed," he mutters, almost under his breath. "You can't just waltz into a federal building looking like that." His tone's dripping with condescension, like he's talking to someone half his size. Celeste doesn't flinch. She reaches into her blazer, pulls out her federal credentials, and hands them over. The badge catches the light, clear as day, but Riker barely looks at it. He snatches it, gives it a half-hearted glance, and stuffs it into his pocket, like it's nothing. "I'd like that returned," Celeste says, her voice steady but firm. Riker steps closer, looming over her. "You in a rush to get somewhere, sweetheart?" The word lands like a punch, loaded with disrespect. Celeste's grip tightens on her portfolio, but her face stays composed. She's not about to let this guy get under her skin. A younger female guard by the X-ray scanner shifts nervously, watching the scene unfold. She can feel the tension, but stays quiet, her eyes darting between Celeste and Riker. "I need to get to a courtroom," Celeste says, her words clear, unwavering. Riker's face hardens. "Then you'll follow my procedure." His voice is sharp, no room for argument. "That includes random checks. Let's go." Before she can respond, he grabs her upper arm, his grip heavy, and starts pulling her down a side hallway, away from the main flow of people. The hallway's narrow, cold, and windowless, the kind of place that feels like it was built to make you uneasy. They reach a small, sterile room lit by harsh fluorescent lights. In the center sits a steel chair next to a rolling cart with scanning equipment and, chillingly, a pair of clippers just sitting there on the edge. Celeste's heart skips a beat. She knows what's coming, and her stomach twists, but her voice stays steady. "I don't consent to this," she says, loud and clear. "You have no legal cause to detain me. You're acting suspicious." Riker brushes her off. "That's cause enough," he says, pointing to the chair. "Sit down." Celeste doesn't move. She's not about to play along with this nonsense. Riker leans in, his voice low and venomous. "You think that badge you flashed means something here? Not to me." Right then, two more officers step into the room. One's a guy in his 30s, shaved head, nervous eyes. He grabs her left wrist. The other moves to the chair, ready to force her down. Her pulse spikes, but she holds her ground. "This is a violation," she says, her voice rising just enough to carry weight. "I want your names." No one answers. Instead, Riker picks up the clippers. "What are you doing?" Celeste demands, shock creeping into her tone. "Standard procedure," Riker mutters, flicking the clippers on. The buzz fills the room, loud and menacing. "You could be hiding something in that mop of yours," he says, sneering at her silver twists. The buzz of those clippers still echoed in Celeste's ears as she left that cold, sterile room. Each step down the corridor felt heavier, not from fear, but from a fury that was building inside her, like a storm ready to break. Her scalp stung where her silver twists, symbols of her heritage, her strength, had been hacked away. Now uneven patches remained, a raw reminder of the violation she'd just endured. But Celeste didn't falter. She kept her head high, her steps steady, even as two clerks passing by glanced at her and quickly looked away, too uncomfortable to meet her eyes. The hallway was quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing down on you. But Celeste wasn't here to break. She was here to change everything. The hum of voices from the courtroom grew louder as she got closer. This wasn't just any day in court. It was a high-profile hearing on police misconduct, the kind that had reporters, activists, and big-name lawyers packing the gallery. Celeste was supposed to slip in through the private chambers where her judicial robe was waiting, all the usual formalities laid out. But after what just happened, none of that mattered. She stopped outside the courtroom doors, took a deep breath, and pushed them open wide. The room froze. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned. Lawyers, journalists, defendants. Everyone stared as Celeste walked in, her heels clicking loud on the marble floor. The shock hit like a wave. This woman, scalp still raw from Riker's clippers, wasn't a defendant or a spectator. She was the judge. The realization rippled through the crowd, and you could feel the air shift. Celeste moved with purpose, her face calm but sharp, like a blade honed by years of discipline. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just made her way to the bench, the seat that had been waiting for her. The room was dead silent, every eye on her. Some looked confused, others stunned, but a few caught on quick, their expressions shifting to something like awe. Celeste slid behind the bench, her movements smooth, deliberate, like she was claiming her space in a world that had just tried to tear her down. Deputy Riker was still by the side door, his smug smirk long gone. When their eyes met, his face went pale. His lips parted, but nothing came out. For the first time that morning, he looked small, like a man who just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Celeste didn't linger on him, not yet. She reached for her judicial robe, folded neatly beside her, and slipped it on, slow and steady, like she was putting on armor. No one moved to help her. No one needed to. This was her moment. She turned to the court clerk, her voice steady as stone. "Is the docket ready?" The clerk, still rattled by the scene, stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Celeste nodded, settling into her chair. The leather creaked, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every face, every whisper. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, United States versus Charleston Police Department," she said, her tone firm, like nothing had happened. "Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. All parties present?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Lawyers shifted in their seats, some looking nervous, others angry that a black woman, after what she'd just been through, had the nerve to sit there and command the room. But Celeste was unbothered. "We will proceed," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The first witness was called, an officer involved in a brutal incident during a peaceful protest where he'd shoved an elderly veteran to the ground, breaking his ribs. As he took the stand, Celeste listened, her pen moving across her legal pad, her face unreadable. She didn't ask questions yet, just took it all in, her mind sharp, focused. In her peripheral vision, she could see Riker, still by the door, his hands twitching at his belt, his weight shifting like he wanted to bolt. He knew something was coming, and it was eating him alive. After the officer's testimony, Celeste called for a brief recess. The courtroom buzzed as people filed out, whispering, typing, stealing glances at her. But Celeste stayed put, her eyes fixed ahead, her hands folded on the bench. The weight of what had happened in that screening room still sat heavy in her chest, but she wasn't going to let it break her. Not now, not ever. When the room cleared, leaving just her clerk, a couple of officers, and Riker, Celeste finally turned to him. "Deputy Riker," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. He froze, mid-step, his eyes wide with panic. "Step forward," she commanded. Riker stumbled closer, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "State your full name for the record," she said, her gaze locked on him. Hank Riker," he stammered, his voice barely holding together. Celeste tapped her pen against her legal pad, slow and deliberate. "How long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse?" Riker swallowed hard. 14 years. "And in those 14 years," Celeste said, leaning forward, her voice cold and precise, "how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The room went dead silent. Riker's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Your Honor, I didn't—" he started, but Celeste cut him off. "That's not what I asked. How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Riker?" He stammered again, his eyes darting around for an escape that wasn't there. I'm not sure." Celeste didn't let up. 12, she said, her voice ringing out. 12 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed, because you hid behind procedure and protocol. Riker's hand shook. his whole body screaming guilt. He looked around, desperate for someone to bail him out, but the room was empty of allies. 12 complaints, Celeste repeated, her words heavy, deliberate, all ignored because people like me are easy to silence. You thought I was just another black woman you could bully, humiliate, and forget. But today, you're the one who'll be forgotten. The air in the room was thick, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Riker stood there, exposed, his power crumbling in real time. Celeste leaned back, her voice steady but commanding. Because of you, Deputy Riker, this courthouse, this supposed temple of justice, has been stained. Because of your actions, the sanctity of this court is now in question. And because you assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation, effective immediately. She nodded to the officers by the door. They moved fast, cuffing Riker's wrists behind his back. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. He didn't resist as they led him out, his once heavy footsteps now weak, defeated. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence said it all, a quiet so deep it felt like the whole room was holding its breath, processing the magnitude of what had just gone down. Celeste stayed calm, her hands still folded, her expression unreadable. But inside, that fire of purpose burned brighter than ever. She wasn't just presiding over a case, she was rewriting the rules. The courtroom was still buzzing from Riker's takedown, but Celeste didn't pause to soak it in. She sat behind the bench, her judicial robe settling around her like armor, her face calm but sharp. The gallery was packed. Lawyers, reporters, activists, all whispering about what had just gone down. The air felt electric, like the room itself knew something bigger was coming. Celeste tapped her gavel once, cutting through the murmurs. "Court is back in session," she said, her voice steady, commanding. The case at hand was a big one, United States versus Charleston Police Department, with charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. But after what happened with Riker, it was clear this wasn't just about the police. It was about the courthouse, the system, the people who'd let men like Riker run wild for years. Celeste was here to hold them all accountable, and everyone could feel it. The next witness was an officer tied to the case, a guy who'd roughed up a protester during a peaceful march. He took the stand, all stiff posture and rehearsed answers. But Celeste wasn't here for the script. She listened, her pen moving across her legal pad, her eyes locked on him. When he finished, she leaned forward. "Officer, do you consider broken ribs a minor injury?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. The officer shifted, caught off guard. "No, Your Honor," he mumbled. Celeste didn't let up. "Then why did your report call it minor bruising?" The room went quiet. The officer stammered, his eyes darting to his lawyer, but Celeste kept going. "Did you review that report before signing it?" He nodded, barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Celeste's gaze was unrelenting. "So you knowingly downplayed an injury to an unarmed civilian? Is that what you're telling this court?" The gallery stirred, whispers rippling through the crowd. The officer's face reddened, but he had no answer. Celeste leaned back, her point made. She wasn't just questioning him, she was exposing a pattern, a culture of lies and cover-ups that went way beyond one incident. The defense lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. Celeste's questions had cracked open the truth, and it was spilling out fast. As the testimony wrapped, Celeste called for another recess. The room emptied, but the energy didn't fade. Reporters were already typing up stories, their phones buzzing with notifications. Outside, word of Riker's arrest was spreading, and a crowd was forming on the courthouse steps. Protesters, community leaders, regular folks who'd heard about the judge, who'd stood up to a bully with a badge. Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't just about Riker or this case. It was about every person who'd been silenced by the system, and she wasn't done fighting for them. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Her clerk stepped in, followed by a young woman, Megan, a court intern, her glasses fogged from rushing through the lobby. Megan looked pale, her hands trembling. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I saw what happened this morning with Deputy Riker. Outside the screening room. I didn't say anything then. I was scared." Celeste studied her, seeing the guilt and fear in her eyes. She didn't rush to respond, just nodded. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. "That matters." Megan's shoulders sagged, like a weight had lifted. "I didn't stop it," she said, her voice cracking. Celeste shook her head. "No, but you're speaking now. That's more than most." Megan's eyes glistened, but she stood taller. "If you need me to testify, I will." Celeste reached out, placing a hand on Megan's for a brief moment, a quiet gesture of solidarity. No words were needed. The door creaked again as people started filing back in, the recess ending. Celeste gave Megan a nod, and the intern slipped out, her steps a little steadier. The courtroom filled up fast, the tension thicker than before. Celeste tapped her gavel, bringing the room to order. The next witness was called Denise Talley, a former courthouse employee who'd worked records for years. Denise was sharp, her blazer crisp, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. Celeste recognized her strength right away, the kind that comes from years of watching injustice up close. "Miss Talley," Celeste said, her voice deliberate, "can you tell us about your role here?" Denise adjusted her posture. "I was record supervisor for 8 years, front desk before that. I've been around long enough to know how things work, and how they don't." Celeste nodded. "Were you aware of complaints against Deputy Riker?" Denise's jaw tightened. "Yes, too many to count," Celeste pressed. "Can you estimate?" Denise didn't hesitate. 12 official complaints, at least twice that many informal ones. But they were mishandled, some marked resolved when they weren't. Others just vanished. The room stirred, murmurs growing louder. Celeste's gaze stayed sharp. "Who gave those instructions?" Denise paused, then dropped the bomb. "Judge Terrence Mahoney." The name landed like a thunderclap. Mahoney, a respected judge who'd once mentored Celeste, was now tied to this mess. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. The prosecutor jumped in. "Why would he suppress those reports?" Denise's voice trembled but held firm. "He said it would undermine public trust, that it'd make the courthouse look weak." Celeste's fingers curled around her pen, her face still, but her mind racing. She'd heard this excuse before: justice sacrificed to save face, abuse ignored to keep the system looking clean. She muttered under her breath. Justice delayed to preserve appearances. Then, louder, to Denise. "Did anyone else speak out?" Denise exhaled. "Every time I tried, I was told, that's just how it is." "Not anymore," Celeste said, her voice ringing with finality. The room went dead quiet. Denise's testimony had cracked open a truth that couldn't be ignored, a system that protected men like Riker while silencing everyone else. Celeste called another recess, the courtroom emptying in a wave of hushed voices. Lawyers whispered, activists nodded to each other, and reporters raced to file their stories. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a turning point. In her chambers, Celeste stood by the window, looking out at the growing crowd on the courthouse steps. Signs bobbed in the air. Justice starts now. Protect black women. The weight of their hope pressed on her, but it didn't break her. It fueled her. Her clerk stepped in, holding a manila folder. "Your Honor, the Senate Judiciary Committee's asking for your statement on judicial oversight failures tied to the Riker incident. Celeste didn't flinch. She opened the folder, scanning the letter inside. There's more, the clerk said, voice tight. 2 retired judges and a former DA resigned this morning, citing health reasons. Celeste's expression stayed steady. She'd expected the system to start scrambling. Bring in the attorneys, she said. We're finishing this today. The courtroom filled again, the air charged with something new, hope, maybe, or the sense that the walls of silence were finally cracking. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. This wasn't just about her or Riker anymore. It was about every voice that had been ignored, and she was ready to make sure they were heard. The courtroom was packed, the air buzzing like a live wire. Reporters crammed the gallery, their pens flying across notebooks, while activists and locals squeezed in, whispering about the bombshells from the last session. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe sharp, her face calm but fierce, like a storm held back by sheer will. The room rose as she took her seat, the respect in their eyes no longer just for her title, but for the fight she was leading. She tapped her gavel once. Court is now in session. The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, was already a firestorm, but after Riker's takedown and Denise Talley's testimony about buried complaints, it was clear this wasn't just about police misconduct. It was about a courthouse, a system that had let abuse fester for years. Celeste was here to rip that veil off, and everyone could feel the weight of it. The next witness was Andrew Taylor, a former U.S. Marshal with over 20 years in law enforcement. He walked to the stand, his posture heavy, like he was carrying a decade of guilt. Celeste recognized him, not just from his file, but from the look in his eyes, the kind of regret that comes from staying silent too long. Taylor took the oath, his voice low but steady. I worked here from 2004 to 2012, he said, glancing at Celeste. I saw a lot. Most of it I let slide, didn't want to be labeled the angry black officer. The room leaned in, hanging on his words. Taylor's eyes locked onto Celeste's. What I saw from Riker, I should have reported. I didn't, and I regret it. Celeste nodded, giving him space to unload. He started small, Taylor went on. Disrespect, over-policing, snide comments. But by 2010, he wasn't just aggressive. He was dangerous. The gallery stirred, murmurs rippling through. Taylor described Riker's escalation, unnecessary force, intimidation, targeting people who couldn't fight back. He'd reported it once, but the memo vanished. They told us, he's the kind of man we want handling difficult people. Celeste's jaw tightened, but her face stayed composed. She'd heard this story before. Officers protected, abuses ignored, all to keep the system's gears turning. Why didn't you push harder? She asked, her voice calm but pointed. Taylor exhaled, his voice breaking. I was tired of being the one who had to fight. I left 2 years later, not because of the work, but because of the silence. He looked at Celeste, his eyes raw. But you, Judge Monroe, sitting there after what they did to you, that's bigger than a bench. The room went still. Taylor's words hit like a punch, summing up what everyone was feeling. Celeste didn't speak right away, letting the truth settle. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, she said finally, her voice steady. You've been heard. Taylor stepped down, passing officers who'd once been his colleagues. Their heads were bowed, shame written across their faces. Celeste called for a recess, the courtroom emptying in a wave of hushed voices. Reporters raced to file stories, their phones lighting up with alerts. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had grown, protesters holding signs, chanting for justice. Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind sharp. She knew this was bigger than Riker, bigger than this case. It was about every person who'd been crushed by the system, and she was their voice now. A knock at her chamber's door broke her thoughts. Her clerk stepped in, followed by Reverend Marcus Hill, a community leader with a gray beard and eyes that burned with purpose. "Reverend," Celeste said, standing, "what brings you here?" Marcus handed her a folded paper. "I won't take much time," he said. "Just wanted you to know we're out there. We see what you're doing, and we're with you." Celeste unfolded the paper, a list of names, phone numbers, notes about people victimized by Riker, their complaints ignored. Some went back years. "How many are new?" she asked. Marcus's voice was firm. "Most. Some were scared. Some were told it wasn't worth it. But now they're ready to talk." Celeste met his eyes, a spark of resolve igniting. They were wrong. It is worth it now. Marcus nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "It is because of you." As he left, Celeste stared at the list, her fingers tracing the names. This wasn't just about one man. It was about a system that had failed over and over. But now that system was cracking, and she was ready to break it open. She called her clerk back. "Get the attorneys in here. We're moving forward." The courtroom filled again, the energy shifting to something new, hope, defiance, a sense that the tide was turning. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. She tapped her gavel, her voice clear. "Before we proceed, I'd like to enter new material into the record." She nodded to her clerk, who handed out a folder, the 12 complaints against Riker, plus the correspondence that buried them. The defense lawyer tried to object, but Celeste shut him down with a single raised hand. "Sit down," she said, her tone unyielding. The room went quiet as the documents were passed around. The complaints weren't just about Riker's actions. They were proof of a system that had protected him, that had chosen silence over justice. Celeste turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "Let the record show this court is no longer interested in protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We are no longer pretending silence is neutrality." Her words landed like a hammer, the room vibrating with their weight. The defense lawyer sank into his seat, out of moves. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the shift. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Celeste called the next witness, a man named Lewis Bryant, who stood hesitantly at the back. His clothes were worn, his hands trembling, but his voice carried pain and truth. "I was arrested here in 2011 by Riker," he said, "for raising my voice when my daughter's case was dismissed. He slammed me into a wall, broke 2 ribs. The room gasped. Lewis pointed to the front desk. "I filed a complaint right there, but the report said I tripped." The gallery buzzed with anger, the lie so blatant it stung. "I never came back," Lewis said, his voice cracking. "I couldn't fight a system that wouldn't listen, but I am here now." Celeste's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. "Was a complaint filed?" Louis nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." She turned to the room. "Anyone else?" Hands started rising, 5, 10, 15 people, each with a story, a truth that had been buried. Celeste stood, her eyes scanning the crowd. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was theirs, and she was ready to lead it. "We'll hear every one of you," she said, her voice ringing out. "This ends today." The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled, reporters scribbling furiously, activists leaning forward, locals whispering in disbelief. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe sharp against the polished wood, her face a mask of calm resolve. But you could feel the fire in her, the kind that doesn't burn out. The room rose as she settled in, the respect in their eyes now a mix of awe and hope. She tapped her gavel once, the sound cutting through the buzz. Court is now in session. The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, was already a national headline, but after Riker's arrest and the flood of testimonies, it was clear this was bigger than one trial. It was about a system that had let men like Riker thrive, silencing anyone who dared speak up. Celeste was here to tear that system apart, and the gallery knew it. They hung on her every word, every move. The next witness was a woman named Carla Evans, a former courthouse janitor in her late 50s. She walked to the stand, her steps slow but steady, her eyes carrying the weight of years spent invisible. Celeste recognized her quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving a world that tries to erase you. Carla took the oath, her voice soft but clear. "I worked here for 12 years, she said. Saw a lot, heard a lot. Never said much, 'cause I needed the job." Celeste nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "What did you see, Ms. Evans?" Carla's hands gripped the edge of the stand. "Riker wasn't just rough with folks coming through security. He'd target people. Black folks, mostly. Women, young men, didn't matter. He'd pull 'em aside, make 'em wait, scare 'em. I saw him shove a kid, maybe 16, into a wall for talking back. Kid didn't even fight, just cried." The room stirred, anger rippling through the crowd. Celeste's pen moved across her legal pad, her face unreadable, but her focus razor-sharp. "Did you report this?" she asked. Carla's voice wavered. "I told my supervisor once. He said, 'Stay out of it, Carla. That's above your pay grade.' After that, I kept my head down." She looked at Celeste, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry I didn't do more." Celeste leaned forward, her voice steady. "You're doing it now. That's enough." Carla's shoulders relaxed, a tear slipping down her cheek. The gallery was quiet, the weight of her words sinking in. Celeste turned to the room. "Anyone else?" More hands went up. 7, 8, 10 people, each with a story of Riker's abuse, each ready to break their silence. The room felt alive, like a dam had burst and the truth was flooding out. One by one they took the stand. A delivery driver who'd been roughed up for looking suspicious. A single mom who'd been detained for hours over a parking ticket. A college student who'd been called slurs during a random search. Each story painted a clearer picture, a courthouse where power was a weapon, and Riker was just one of many wielding it. Celeste listened, her notes piling up, her questions sharp but fair. She didn't rush them, didn't interrupt. She gave them space to be heard, something the system had denied them for years. The defense lawyer tried to object, arguing the testimonies were irrelevant, but Celeste shut him down fast. "These accounts establish a pattern," she said, her voice cold and precise. "A pattern this court will not ignore. Sit down." The lawyer sank into his seat out of moves. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the shift. This wasn't just about the police case anymore. It was about the courthouse itself, and Celeste was holding it accountable. After the last witness, Celeste called for a recess. The room emptied, but the energy lingered, heavy and electric. Reporters raced to their phones, their stories already going viral. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had doubled. Protesters chanting, signs waving, "No more silence, justice for all." Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind racing. She knew this was a tipping point. The system was cracking, and she was the one driving the wedge. A knock at her chamber's door broke her focus. Her clerk stepped in, holding a thick envelope. "Your Honor," she said, her voice tight, "this just came from the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're demanding a full report on the Riker incident and judicial oversight failures." Celeste opened the envelope, scanning the letter inside. It was official, heavy with implications. "Anything else?" she asked. The clerk hesitated. 3 more judges resigned this afternoon, and the DA's office is under pressure to step down. Celeste's expression didn't change, but inside, she felt the ground shifting. The system was scrambling, trying to save face, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it wasn't going back in. "Get the attorneys," she said. "We're not stopping." The clerk nodded and slipped out, leaving Celeste alone with her thoughts. She looked out the window at the crowd below, their voices rising in a steady chant. This wasn't just her fight, it was theirs, and she was ready to see it through. The courtroom filled again, the air charged with something new, defiance maybe, or the sense that history was being made. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. She tapped her gavel, her voice clear. "Before we continue, I'm entering additional evidence into the record." She nodded to her clerk, who passed out another folder, internal memos, emails, proof that Riker's complaints had been buried by higher-ups, including Judge Terrence Mahoney. The defense tried to object, but Celeste's raised hand stopped them cold. "Enough," she said. "This court is done with excuses." The room went silent as the documents were reviewed. The memos showed a clear pattern: complaints dismissed, victims ignored, all to protect the courthouse's image. Celeste turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "This court will no longer shield those who abuse power. We are here for the truth, and the truth will be heard." Her words landed like a thunderbolt, the room vibrating with their weight. The defense lawyer slumped, defeated. The gallery leaned forward, ready for what came next. The next witness was a former clerk, James Reed, who'd worked under Mahoney. He took the stand, nervous but determined. "I handled Riker's complaints," he said. "Mahoney told me to mark them resolved, even when they weren't, said it was for the greater good." Celeste's gaze was unrelenting. "Whose good?" she asked. Reed faltered. "His, the courthouse's, not the people's." The gallery buzzed, anger and disbelief mixing in the air. Celeste's voice cut through. "Did you ever question those orders?" Reed shook his head. "No, Your Honor. I should have, but I didn't." Celeste nodded, her face unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. You're dismissed." As he stepped down, the room felt heavier, the truth piling up like stones. Celeste called for another recess, the courtroom emptying in a wave of voices. She stayed at the bench, her eyes fixed ahead, her resolve unbreakable. This wasn't just about Riker or Mahoney, it was about a system that had failed its people, and she was ready to burn it down to build something better. The courtroom was a storm waiting to break, every seat packed with people hanging on the edge of their chairs. Reporters scribbled notes like their lives depended on it. Activists exchanged determined glances, and locals whispered in awe. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe crisp, her face a fortress of calm, but her eyes burning with purpose. The room rose as she settled in, the air thick with respect, not just for her title, but for the fight she was leading. She tapped her gavel once, the sound slicing through the buzz. Court is now in session. The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, was a national lightning rod, but it had grown into something bigger. It wasn't just about police misconduct anymore. It was about a courthouse, a system that had let men like Riker operate unchecked. Celeste was here to dismantle that system, and the gallery could feel the ground shifting beneath them. Every word she spoke, every move she made, was rewriting the rules. The next witness was a man named Lewis Bryant, who'd already spoken briefly, but was back to give a fuller account. He shuffled to the stand, his worn clothes and trembling hands telling a story of hardship, but his eyes held a quiet strength. Celeste recognized him from his earlier testimony, arrested by Riker in 2011, ribs broken for raising his voice. "Mr. Bryant," she said, her voice steady, "please tell us what happened that day." Lewis took a deep breath, his voice quivering but clear. "My daughter's case got dismissed, some minor charge, nothing serious. I got upset, raised my voice at the desk. Riker didn't like that. He grabbed me, slammed me into a wall. I heard my ribs crack, couldn't breathe right for weeks." The room gasped, the brutality laid bare. Lewis pointed to the front desk. "I filed a complaint right there, but the report said I tripped. Ain't no way I tripped." The gallery buzzed with anger, the lie so blatant it stung. Celeste's pen moved across her legal pad, her face unreadable, but her focus razor-sharp. "Did anyone follow up on your complaint?" she asked. Lewis shook his head. "No, Your Honor. They told me to let it go, said it wouldn't change nothing." Celeste leaned forward, her voice firm. "It's changing now. Thank you, Mr. Bryant." As Louis stepped down, Celeste turned to the room. "Anyone else?" Hands shot up, 5, 10, 15 people, each with a story of Riker's abuse, each ready to break their silence. The room felt alive, like a wave of truth was crashing through. Celeste nodded. "We'll hear every one of you," she said, her voice ringing out. "This court is listening." One by one they took the stand. A teacher who'd been detained for looking suspicious at a hearing. A retiree who'd been shoved during a security check. A young woman who'd been mocked and searched for no reason. Each story added weight to the truth. A courthouse where power was a weapon and Riker was just one of many swinging it. Celeste listened, her questions sharp but fair, giving each person space to be heard. The defense lawyer tried to object, calling the testimonies irrelevant, but Celeste shut him down. "These accounts establish a pattern," she said, her voice cold. "Sit down." The lawyer slumped, out of moves. The gallery leaned forward, the energy shifting to something fierce, defiance, hope, a sense that justice was finally in reach. After the last witness, Celeste called for a recess. The room emptied, but the tension lingered, heavy and electric. Reporters raced to their phones, their stories going viral. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had grown into a sea of people, protesters chanting, signs waving, "No more silence, justice now." Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind racing. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined, and she was ready to carry it forward. A knock at her chamber's door broke her thoughts. Her clerk stepped in, followed by a familiar face, Reverend Marcus Hill, the community leader who'd given her a list of victims. "Reverend," Celeste said, standing. Marcus held out another folded paper. "More names," he said, his voice steady. "People who heard what's happening. They're ready to come forward." Celeste scanned the list, dozens of names, some with stories going back decades. "How many?" she asked. Marcus's eyes burned with purpose, enough to shake this place to its foundation. Celeste nodded, a spark of resolve igniting. "They'll be heard," she said. Marcus smiled faintly. "You're doing what we've prayed for, Judge." As he left, Celeste stared at the list, her fingers tracing the names. This wasn't just about Riker. It was about a system that had failed its people, and she was ready to tear it down. She called her clerk back. "Get the attorneys in here. We're moving forward." The courtroom filled again, the air charged with something new, hope, defiance, a sense that history was being made. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. She tapped her gavel, her voice clear. "Before we continue, I'm entering additional evidence into the record." She nodded to her clerk, who passed out another folder, memos, emails, proof that Riker's complaints had been buried by Judge Terrence Mahoney and others. The defense tried to object, but Celeste's raised hand stopped them cold. "Enough," she said. "This court is done with lies." The room went silent as the documents were reviewed. The memos showed a clear pattern: complaints dismissed, victims ignored, all to protect the courthouse's image. Celeste turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "This court will no longer shield those who abuse power. We are here for the truth, and the truth will be heard." Her words landed like a thunderbolt, the room vibrating with their weight. The defense lawyer sank into his seat, defeated. The gallery leaned forward, ready for what came next. The next witness was a former officer, Sarah Nguyen, who'd worked security with Riker. She took the stand, her posture stiff, her voice steady, but tinged with guilt. "I saw Riker target people," she said. "Black folks, mostly. He'd laugh about it, say they needed to learn respect. I never said nothing. I should have." Celeste's gaze was unrelenting. "Why didn't you?" Nguyen exhaled. "I was new, didn't want to rock the boat, but I'm here now." Celeste nodded. "Thank you, Officer Nguyen. You're dismissed." As Nguyen stepped down, the room felt heavier, the truth piling up. Celeste called for another recess, the courtroom emptying in a wave of voices. She stayed at the bench, her eyes fixed ahead, her resolve unbreakable. Outside, the chants grew louder, the crowd swelling. This wasn't just a trial, it was a revolution, and Celeste was at its heart. The courtroom was a powder keg, every seat filled, the air buzzing with tension. Reporters were scribbling like their pens were on fire. Activists leaned forward with clenched fists, and locals whispered in hushed awe. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe sharp, her face a fortress of calm, but her eyes blazing with purpose. The room rose as she settled in, the respect in their eyes now a mix of reverence and anticipation. She tapped her gavel once, the sound slicing through the noise. "Court is now in session." The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, was a national firestorm, but it had grown into something much bigger. It wasn't just about police misconduct or even Riker's abuse. It was about a courthouse, a system that had let power run unchecked for decades. Celeste was here to rip that system apart, and the gallery could feel the ground shaking. Every move she made was deliberate, every word a step toward justice. The next witness was a woman named Tanya Williams, a paralegal who'd worked in the courthouse for a decade. She took the stand, her posture steady, but her hands trembling slightly, like she was carrying a weight she'd held for too long. Celeste recognized her resolve, the kind that comes from years of seeing injustice up close. Tanya took the oath, her voice clear but heavy. "I worked under Judge Mahoney," she said. "I saw how complaints against Riker were handled, or rather, how they weren't." Celeste leaned forward, her voice calm but piercing. "Can you elaborate, Ms. Williams?" Tanya exhaled, her eyes meeting Celeste's. "Complaints came in, dozens, maybe more. Black folks, mostly, saying Riker roughed them up, humiliated them. I'd pass them to Mahoney's office, but they'd come back marked resolved or unfounded. Sometimes they just disappeared. I asked once, and Mahoney told me to stop digging, said it was for the courthouse's reputation." The gallery stirred, murmurs of anger rippling through. Celeste's pen moved across her legal pad, her face unreadable, but her focus razor-sharp. "Did you ever see evidence that those complaints were investigated?" she asked. Tanya shook her head. "No, Your Honor. They were buried. Mahoney said it was to protect public trust." But it wasn't about trust. It was about protecting Riker. The room buzzed, the weight of Tanya's words hitting hard. Celeste's gaze stayed steady. "Did anyone else know?" Tanya nodded. "Plenty of us did. Clerks, paralegals, even some officers. But we were told to keep quiet. You either played along or you were out. Celeste's voice was firm. Thank you, Ms. Williams. You're dismissed. Tanya stepped down, her shoulders lighter, like she'd finally let go of a burden. Celeste turned to the gallery. Anyone else? Hands went up. 6, 8, 12 people, each with a story, each ready to break their silence. The room felt alive, like the truth was a flood breaking through a dam. One by one they took the stand. A security guard who'd seen Riker target a black teenager. A court reporter who'd overheard Mahoney dismiss complaints. A janitor who'd found shredded documents in a back office. Each story added to the pile, exposing a system that had chosen silence over justice. The defense lawyer tried to object, arguing the testimonies were piling on, but Celeste shut him down fast. These accounts establish a systemic failure, she said, her voice cold and precise. This court will hear them. Sit down. The lawyer sank into his seat, his arguments crumbling. The gallery leaned forward, the energy shifting to something fierce, hope, defiance, a sense that the tide was turning for good. After the last witness, Celeste called for a recess. The room emptied, but the tension hung heavy, like a storm about to break. Reporters raced to their phones, their stories going viral. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had swelled into a movement, protesters chanting, signs waving, "End the silence, justice for all." Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind racing. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined, and she was ready to carry it to the end. A knock at her chamber's door broke her focus. Her clerk stepped in, holding a thick envelope. "Your Honor," she said, her voice tight, "the Senate Judiciary Committee's escalating their inquiry. They want your testimony on the courthouse's oversight failures." Celeste opened the envelope, scanning the letter inside. It was heavy, official, demanding answers. "Anything else?" she asked. The clerk hesitated. 4 more judges resigned this morning. The DA's office is in chaos. 2 senior prosecutors stepped down. Celeste's expression didn't change, but inside she felt the system buckling. The truth was out, and the powers that be were scrambling to save face. "Get the attorneys," she said. "We're moving forward." The clerk nodded and slipped out, leaving Celeste alone. She looked out the window at the crowd below, their voices rising in a steady chant. This wasn't just her fight, it was theirs, and she was their voice. The courtroom filled again, the air electric with anticipation. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. She tapped her gavel, her voice clear. "Before we proceed, I'm entering additional evidence into the record." She nodded to her clerk, who passed out another folder. More memos, emails, proof that Mahoney and others had buried Riker's complaints to protect the courthouse's image. The defense tried to object, but Celeste's raised hand stopped them cold. "Enough," she said. "This court is done with cover-ups." The room went silent as the documents were reviewed. The memos showed a clear pattern: complaints dismissed, victims ignored, all to keep the system looking clean. Celeste turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "This court will no longer shield those who abuse power. We are here for the truth, and the truth will be heard." Her words landed like a thunderbolt, the room vibrating with their weight. The defense lawyer slumped, out of moves. The gallery leaned forward, ready for what came next. The next witness was a former bailiff, Michael Carter, who'd worked alongside Riker. He took the stand, his posture rigid, his voice heavy with regret. "I saw Riker go after people," he said. "Black folks, mostly. He'd pick fights, push them around, laugh about it later. I never reported it. I should have." Celeste's gaze was unrelenting. "Why didn't you?" Carter exhaled. "I thought that's how it worked here. You keep quiet. You keep your job." Celeste nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You're dismissed." As Carter stepped down, the room felt heavier, the truth piling up like bricks. Celeste called for another recess, the courtroom emptying in a wave of voices. She stayed at the bench, her eyes fixed ahead, her resolve unbreakable. Outside, the chants grew louder, the crowd swelling. This wasn't just a trial, it was a revolution, and Celeste was leading the charge. The courtroom was a battlefield, every seat packed, the air so thick with tension you could cut it. Reporters were typing furiously, activists gripped their signs, and locals whispered in awe. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe sharp, her face calm, but her eyes burning with unyielding resolve. The room rose as she settled in, the respect in their eyes now a mix of reverence and anticipation. She tapped her gavel once, the sound ringing out like a call to arms. Court is now in session. The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, had become a national symbol, but it was bigger than that now. It wasn't just about police misconduct or Riker's abuse. It was about a courthouse, a system that had let power run wild for decades. Celeste was here to dismantle it, and the gallery could feel the walls crumbling. Every word she spoke was a hammer strike, every move a step toward justice. The next witness was a woman named Evelyn Harris, a retired court stenographer in her late 60s. She walked to the stand, her step slow but deliberate, her eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who'd seen it all. Celeste recognized her quiet strength, the kind that comes from years of watching injustice from the shadows. Evelyn took the oath, her voice steady but heavy. "I worked here for 22 years, she said. Typed up every hearing, every trial. I saw how Riker operated, how he'd target folks, black folks mostly, and how the system let him." Celeste leaned forward, her voice calm but piercing. "What did you see, Miss Harris?" Evelyn's hands gripped the stand. "Riker wasn't just rough, he was cruel. I saw him drag a young black woman out of the gallery once, just for whispering to her friend, said she was disrupting, left bruises on her arm. I typed up the complaint she filed, but it never went anywhere. Judge Mahoney's office marked it unsubstantiated." The gallery stirred, anger rippling through the crowd. Celeste's pen moved across her legal pad, her face unreadable, but her focus relentless. "Did you ever question why?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. "Once. I asked Mahoney's clerk why complaints kept vanishing. She said, 'It's how we keep the peace.' Peace for who, I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I was scared of losing my job." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I'm not scared anymore." Celeste's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. "Thank you, Ms. Harris. You're doing the right thing." Evelyn stepped down, her shoulders straighter, like she'd shed a weight she'd carried for years. Celeste turned to the gallery. "Anyone else?" Hands went up. 4, 6, 10 people, each with a story, each ready to break their silence. The room felt electric, like the truth was a wildfire spreading fast. One by one, they took the stand. A maintenance worker who'd seen Riker shove a black teenager. A lawyer who'd overheard Mahoney dismiss complaints as troublemaking. A former intern who'd been told to shred documents tied to Riker's cases. Each story piled onto the truth. A courthouse where power was a weapon, and Riker was just one of many wielding it. Celeste listened, her questions sharp but fair, giving each person space to be heard. The defense lawyer tried to object, calling the testimonies repetitive, but Celeste shut him down. "This court will hear every voice," she said, her voice cold. "Sit down." The lawyer slumped, his arguments dead in the water. The gallery leaned forward, the energy shifting to something fierce, hope, defiance, a sense that justice was finally within reach. After the last witness, Celeste called for a recess. The room emptied, but the tension lingered, heavy and alive. Reporters raced to their phones, their stories blowing up online. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had grown into a movement. Protesters chanting, signs waving, truth over silence, justice now. Celeste stayed at the bench, her hands folded, her mind racing. This was the moment she'd been building toward, and she was ready to see it through. A knock at her chamber's door broke her focus. Her clerk stepped in, holding a thick envelope. "Your Honor," she said, her voice tight, "the Senate Judiciary Committee's pushing harder. They want your testimony by tomorrow on the courthouse's oversight failures." Celeste opened the envelope, scanning the letter inside. It was heavy, demanding answers and threatening subpoenas. "Anything else?" she asked. The clerk hesitated. 5 more judges resigned today. The DA's office is falling apart. 3 more prosecutors quit. Celeste's expression didn't change, but inside she felt the system collapsing under the weight of the truth. The powers that be were scrambling, but it was too late. "Get the attorneys," she said. "We're finishing this." The clerk nodded and slipped out, leaving Celeste alone. She looked out the window at the crowd below, their voices rising in a steady chant. This wasn't just her fight, it was theirs, and she was their voice. The courtroom filled again, the air crackling with anticipation. Celeste took her seat, the room rising with her. She tapped her gavel, her voice clear. "Before we proceed with closing arguments, I'm entering additional evidence into the record." She nodded to her clerk, who passed out another folder, more memos, emails, proof that Mahoney and others had buried Riker's complaints to protect the courthouse's image. The defense tried to object, but Celeste's raised hand stopped them cold. "Enough," she said. "This court is done with lies." The room went silent as the documents were reviewed. The memos showed a clear pattern: complaints dismissed, victims ignored, all to keep the system looking clean. Celeste turned to the gallery, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "This court will no longer shield those who abuse power. We are here for the truth, and the truth will be heard." Her words landed like a thunderbolt, the room vibrating with their weight. The defense lawyer sank into his seat, defeated. The gallery leaned forward, ready for the final act. The prosecutor stood for their closing argument, their voice steady but charged. "Your Honor, this case isn't just about police misconduct, it's about a courthouse that's been complicit. Riker's actions, Mahoney's cover-ups, the silence of those who knew, it's all part of a system that's failed its people. We ask for accountability, not just for the defendants, but for everyone who let this happen." The defense lawyer rose, his voice shaky, trying to salvage what was left. "Your Honor, these testimonies is not true." The courtroom was silent, as if a storm had just swept through. Every seat was filled to capacity, the air heavy with anticipation. Reporters were frozen, pens at the ready, activists clutched their signs tightly, and local citizens sat wide-eyed, barely breathing. Celeste Monroe sat behind the bench, her judicial robe crisp, her face calm, but her eyes ablaze with purpose. The room seemed to rise with her presence, the reverence in their eyes now a blend of awe and hope. She struck the gavel once. The sound echoed like a final summons. Court is now in session. The case, United States versus Charleston Police Department, had become a global symbol, but it was bigger than a trial. It wasn't just about police misconduct or Riker's abuses. It was about a system that had allowed power to crush justice for decades. Celeste had torn that system open, and now she was ready to hold it accountable. The audience watched, knowing that history was unfolding before their eyes. Celeste rose, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Before we proceed to sentencing," she said, her voice steady but powerful, "this court will address the full scope of what has been uncovered. She nodded to her clerk, who produced one final binder, documents detailing not only Riker's complaints, but also the names of those who buried them, including Judge Mahoney and other officials. The defense attorney remained silent, his argument long since dead. The room grew still as the documents were reviewed, the truth, a weight no one could ignore. "Let this trial be recorded," Celeste said, her words cutting through the silence, "that this court is no longer complicit in protecting institutions over people. We no longer pretend that silence is justice." The courtroom trembled, her words striking like a bolt of lightning. The defense attorney didn't flinch. His failure hung thick in the air. Celeste turned to the prosecutor. "Your final statement." The prosecutor stood, his voice steady but fierce. "Your Honor, this case has exposed a betrayal, not just by Deputy Riker, but by an entire system that shielded him. The complaints, the cover-ups, the lies, they are all evidence of a failure that has harmed countless lives. We request the maximum sentence for Riker and accountability for those who enabled him. Justice demands it." The courtroom nodded in agreement, soft murmurs of support echoing through the room. The defense attorney rose, his voice frail, almost desperate. "Your Honor, Riker's actions followed procedure, not malice. The system is flawed, yes, but so is the defendant. We ask for leniency." His words fell flat, lifeless. The room did not move. Celeste's eyes remained fixed, unwavering. Her silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. She leaned forward, her voice calm, yet razor-sharp. "You want to talk about procedure? Let's talk about a system that calls a broken rib a ride, that buries complaints to save face, that humiliates a judge for being a black woman. That is the system on trial, and it is guilty." The entire room held its breath, the weight of her words sinking in. Celeste stood tall, her presence commanding. "What happened to me must never happen to anyone again," she said. "But I am here, not as a victim, but as a judge. And I will make sure it never happens again." Her eyes locked onto the gallery, a fire blazing within them. "If you think the truth can be buried again, if you think silence will win, then you are wrong. It ends now." The courtroom doors creaked open, and officers escorted Riker in, his wrists cuffed, his face pale and gaunt. The man who once strutted through the courthouse with a commanding air was gone, replaced by someone small, crushed by the weight of truth. He didn't lift his head, bowed low under the burden of his actions. Celeste's gaze didn't soften as she spoke. "Mr. Riker," she said, her voice cold but steady, "stand." Riker staggered to his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor. Each word from Celeste was deliberate, like a hammer striking down. "This court sentences you to the maximum penalties under federal law, 6 years for abuse of power, 5 years for civil rights violations, 1 year for obstruction of justice, to be served consecutively." The room was silent, the weight of the sentence pressing down on every breath. Riker's shoulders sank, but Celeste wasn't finished. "That was the legal part," she said, her voice shifting to something deeper, more human. "Now here's the truth. Throughout your career, you gave yourself the power to decide who deserved dignity and who didn't. You believed your badge made you untouchable. You thought silence would shield you. But now, you sit in the very seat you once forced others into. No badge, no power, only the weight of what you've done." Riker's face turned ghostly white, his lips quivering, but no words came. The truth had stripped him bare. Celeste nodded to the officers. "Take him away." They led Riker out, his footsteps heavy, his figure slowly disappearing behind the closing doors. The courtroom didn't applaud, didn't cheer. The silence was enough. A deep, reverent quiet that confirmed justice had been served, not with fireworks, but with truth. Celeste turned to the gallery, her voice steady but charged with emotion. This trial isn't just about one man. It's about a system that failed its own people. But today, we've shown that system can change. We've shown that silence can be broken, that truth can rise. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the activists, the reporters, and the local citizens who had come to witness this moment. This is your victory, too. The room stirred, a soft murmur of agreement rising. Celeste tapped her gavel once more. Court is adjourned. The gallery rose, not rushing to leave, but lingering, quietly processing what they had just witnessed. Reporters typed furiously, their stories already beginning to spread. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps erupted, their chants echoing, "Justice now! No more silence!" In her chambers, Celeste sat alone, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. She looked at the list of names Reverend Marcus Hill had given her, dozens of victims ready to speak. She knew the fight wasn't over. This was only the beginning. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her clerk stepped in, holding a new envelope. "Your Honor, the Senate Judiciary Committee is requesting your presence in Washington next week. They want your recommendations on judicial reform." Celeste nodded, her expression calm. "Tell them I'll be there." The clerk hesitated. "There's one more thing. The governor's office called. They want to honor you for your courage." Celeste's lips curled slightly, a faint smile breaking through. "I'll think about it," she said. The clerk slipped out, leaving Celeste alone with her thoughts. She stood and walked to the window. The crowd outside was still there, their protest signs swaying in the fading light. Celeste's gaze softened, but her resolve only deepened. This wasn't about her. It was about them, about every person who had ever been silenced, about every child who deserved a world where justice wasn't a fight, but a promise. She took a deep breath, her steps firm as she left her chambers. As Celeste walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd parted, their cheers rising. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't here for the spotlight. She was here for the work, and that work was just getting started. So here's the takeaway, folks. Justice isn't a building or a badge. It's people standing up, speaking out, refusing to be silenced. Celeste Monroe didn't just win a case, she started a movement, and it's up to us to keep it going. Drop a comment. What did this story make you feel? Have you seen this kind of fight where you live? Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let's keep the conversation alive. Until next time, stay strong, stay vocal, and keep pushing for what's right.